In Warhammer 40.000 Battlesector, you command the newly minted superhumans of the Empire, Primaris Marines, against the Tyrannid threat on the Blood Angels moon of Baal Secundus. Battlesector is a solid turn-based tactics game that does its setting justice. But despite all the gobbledygook I just said, prior knowledge of the Warhammer 40k verse is not required in order for you to enjoy it. The game features a 20 mission long campaign, skirmish mode, multiplayer, and a photo screen cap feature I have not used at all, but which looks pretty cool. The Age of Crimson Dawn campaign will take you through several important places around Baal Secundus, but those tiny tidbits of lore are generally conveyed through the hero units talking to each other and the written descriptions on each mission screen. That being said, the voice acting is pretty solid and appropriately over the top, rough and stern, as the setting requires it. During the campaign, you'll steadily unlock new units for your army, gather new hero-type characters, and upgrade all of your troops through a variety of skill, ability, and weapon trees. The units available to you, besides the hero units, will offer you the opportunity to shoot, bash, slash, plasma, grenade, and immolate your way through an equally diverse array of Tyrannid forces. Now, for those of you who are only passingly aware of the Warhammer 40k universe, these troops will look like most other 40k troops, but these are not your usual Space Marines that we've seen in the Dawn of War series, for instance. No, these are Primaris Marines, a new type of Marine, bigger and better than the Space Marine basic superhuman bitches we've seen up until relatively recently. And now for a little bit of a lore dump. The Primaris Marines have been worked on for the past 10,000 years, improving on the OG Space Marines, which are now called Firstborns, in every aspect. They're tougher, stronger, faster, have more extra organs, and their armor and weapons have been improved and redesigned. Making Primaris Marines is more or less the same process as making Firstborn Space Marines. They still alter already existing average human bodies, however, there is also the potential of elevating some Firstborn Space Marines to Primaris stature, although the surgery comes with risks. Lore-wise, they represent a potential paradigm shift for the battered Imperium following a bunch of catastrophic shit that happened in the Warhammer 40k universe recently. This is why, during the campaign, your lieutenant will talk about this being a test for the Primaris and how detached they seem to be from the old school Blood Angels. Mind you, there are several units that are still old school Space Marines, and you'll be able to sort of tell which is which by their size. Battlesector takes the army point system from the tabletop game. You have a limited pool of points and each unit stack costs a certain amount of points. This seems to be a simple resource mechanic meant to induce some limits to your army size. However, when you add in the skill and progression trees, you can end up with fairly varied types of armies depending on which unit you prefer to focus on. The skill trees are attached to the hero units, two of which are old school Space Marines. There is a Tech Marine, a Dreadnought, and a Sister of Battle. Each of them has a thematic skill upgrade tree, which will feature new and improved abilities for units related to the type of hero unit. The skill trees aren't the same size because you won't have access to all of them from the get-go, seeing as how you discover new hero units as you go through the campaign. Besides the improved stats for your unit stacks, some of the upgrades relate to giving your hero units more abilities, and some are related to some special map-wide sort of effects, basically 3 types of air-to-ground assault. Likewise, some of the upgrades offer your units new weapons, which you'll have to choose for each unit stack when setting up your army. Keep in mind that changing the default weapon setup will cost you extra army points. But enough prepping the ground, let's get into the Tyrannid meat and space potatoes of Battlesector. It's combat. Each unit stack has its own numbers of movement points and action points. You can use the movement points to, well, move, and the action points to either attack or use special abilities. Some abilities have no type of point cost but instead are on a cooldown. You can attack and move for as long as you have available points. There is no order of actions, so you can say move, attack an enemy or use an ability, and then move again. Where and how much you can move with each unit is always clearly marked, and you can also use your action points to move if you don't plan on attacking that turn. Likewise, there are clear markers on the squares that will provoke an attack from an enemy if you were to simply walk your units into them. There are some really cool quality of life features that make the experience very smooth. For instance, when you cursor over a unit stack, you not only see their HP bar illustrated above their heads, but you also get a separate window where you can see the exact numbers of HP for each unit, and this gets updated in real time when affected. So when you attack an enemy stack, you can keep your cursor over them and see exactly how much damage you're doing and how many individual units you're taking out. And the number of individuals in a stack is also super important because the amount of damage they can deal depends on the number of units in each stack. You also have almost complete control over the camera and a fairly strong zoom feature, being able to get very up close and personal with anything on the map from almost any angle. You cannot zoom out completely, however, there is a map feature which will show you the positions of all known troops on the map as well as their status. Range combat is pretty straightforward. Each weapon and ability has an optimal range of use, and one of your main tactical challenges will be to situate your troops in such positions so as to maximize their chance to hit, while also minimizing the chances of them being hit on the enemy turn. Due to the tactical relevance of this type of system, being either closer or farther away than that optimal distance will lead to a reduced chance to hit, even if you're in point blank range. There is also a mechanic called momentum, a separate resource for each unit stack which depletes each turn and is gained generally when enemies are killed. Once 100 momentum is attained, the unit stack can either gain another action point or enhance an ability for its next use. There are several hero unit abilities that can help momentarily boost momentum and its generation, but Battle Sisters, they're a bit masochistic, so they generate momentum when they take damage as well. And this leads me neatly into talking about the RNG in the game when it comes to chance to hit and damage. Depending on the unit stack, its weapon and distance to target, it will have a percentage chance of hitting an enemy. Nothing really new there. However, this percentage chance applies to each individual unit within the stack. So in a stack of say 5 units, each of them has the same chance to hit. And while some shots will obviously miss, most will generally not. This basically eliminates the XCOM issue of missing a 99% shot. One unit could miss that shot, but all 5 missing would be supremely unlikely. In fact, doing a little bit of math with the 5 unit example, the chance of one unit missing a 99% shot is 1 in 100. The chance of all 5 units missing a 99% shot is 1 in 10 billion. This is a great way of both keeping combat feeling interesting and risky while also ensuring damage is being dealt nearly every time shots are fired. As for damage, it also features some RNG, having a minimum and maximum damage a hit can register. And this, combined with the fact that not all shots will hit, makes each encounter very fresh because the same unit stack will have slightly different outcomes when engaging the same type of enemy stack. Melee combat is where things get extra interesting in Battlesector. There are several units which have both ranged and melee attacks, and the melee attacks tend to be very powerful thanks to their high number of armor penetration. They are, however, extra risky since your troops have to literally be next to the enemy in order to engage in melee combat. But that's not necessarily true all of the time, because melee combat has an extra mechanic on top of momentum called a charge attack. Depending on how many movement points your unique stack has and if there is a clear straight line between them and a potential enemy, engaging in melee combat will lead to a charge attack, which will allow your unit to hit with more power and also avoid getting attacked when entering the enemy's zone of control. There are several Tyranid units which feature a lot of armor, and with the exception of the heavy plasma units, the fastest way of dispatching them is by getting up close and personal. Battlesector has the most satisfying Overwatch ability I have yet to experience in a turn-based tactics game. Of course, caveat being, I have not played every turn-based tactics game ever made. I'm pretty sure there is others out there that have good implementations or integrations of the Overwatch mechanic. But this is the first one I played. I felt the mechanic was used to its potential. Basically, in Battlesector you can set up your troops in defensive positions, set their Overwatch range, which can be more or less than the weapon's optimum range, and wait for the relatively mindless Tyranids to walk into a veritable Xeno meat grinder. Overwatching won't generally be as optimal as you attacking, since you can control the range when you're on the attack, but sometimes the more tactical move is to sit back and wait for the enemy to come to you. I mentioned defensive positions, and while these are not a marked feature in the game, every piece of wall or larger thing on the map will act as an obstacle, which will take some of the damage. And one really cool thing is that giant dead bodies will also act as partial cover. There are several difficulty settings you can choose from depending on how hardcore of an experience you want. The default Astartes difficulty offers a decent amount of challenge. However, you shouldn't have issues progressing through the game as long as you still play tactically. I only had to reload the final mission a couple of times because it's a bit different than all the preceding ones. Be ready for a generous investment of time, seeing as how most of these missions tend to last around the 2-hour mark, as long as you do not fast forward through the enemy turn, which thankfully you can do. One intangible thing that doesn't come through any sort of gameplay footage is how manageable the entire army is when organized in these unit stacks. Despite having to control up to 20 individual stacks, it's never a daunting task. It doesn't become tedious or annoying, and one cool thing is that you can move several stacks at the same time. The music is pretty damn good, voice acting likewise, but during the actual missions the unit lines are a bit too repetitive, so those might get a bit annoying. In the Skirmish Mode you'll be able to replay any of the previously finished missions as well as engage in new standalone scenarios, and you can play as the Tyranids as well, or as Marine against Marine. The game comes packed with a lot of multiplayer options. There's the obvious live option of playing the game with someone else at the same time. There's a tournament option, which does what its name says, but the remaining two options are what piqued my interest. The option of asynchronous play is something that will allow the two players to basically take their turns whenever they have the time to. Kinda like a digital version of correspondence chess. A great option for many adulting adults whose responsibilities hinder them from syncing up schedules and getting some gaming done. Then there is the last multiplayer option, which is the most old school option that brought a Heroes of Might and Magic tier to my geek eye: Hot Seat. Yes, Battlesector has a Hot Seat option, and there are few things more nostalgic to me than Hot Seat, so that's why I shouted it out in particular. The single player campaign is the main focal point for now, but I do think Warhammer 40.000 Battlesector has the potential of becoming at least a minor hit in the multiplayer realm thanks to how solid the mechanics are. Also, Slytherin seems to be working on a Paradox Light business model, so I expect they'll be releasing several DLCs with more factions, like what happened with Gladius, which I also covered, and I also expect new campaigns to become available as time goes on. I really dug the game quite a bit, so it definitely gets my nonsense seal of approval, even though some of you might want to wait to get it till your preferred faction becomes available. But yeah, how about you let me know in the comments what is your favorite Warhammer 40k faction and also why? Hey there watcher who's still watching, thank you very much for sticking around. If you enjoyed the video and you wanna do me a titan of a favor, please like it and comment. We need to feed the YouTube machine spirit. If you're interested in my look at other Warhammer 40k titles, a link to the playlist should be available on screen about now. Checking my Patreon would also be highly appreciated if you have Golden Throne money. I've been Steven Ansons, thank you very much for watching, have a great rest of your day, and hopefully you'll see me next time, Emperor willing.